How might our government policies responding to COVID-19 affect women who are victims of domestic violence where home is already an unsafe space? That's a question from CQUniversity domestic violence researcher Dr. Brian Sullivan, who joins me today. Thanks, Brian.
Good to be here, Jess. Thanks for the invitation.
No worries. Now, Brian, you've reflected on some possible consequences of this particular scenario. Now, would you care to share with me, what some of these consequences are in terms of social distancing?
Well, I think in terms of social distancing and with the social isolation, there's a very real possibility that women who are already victims of domestic violence are going to be more monitored, more controlled. Abuse will increase of these women because the perpetrators, their partners, their intimate partners, are more likely to be in lockdown with them. And with social distancing, the perpetrator is going to have another avenue to further his abuse and control of her because of these government policies. And it's unintended, of course, but it's going to be an expected outcome for sure. And I think that's been found in places like China, France, the USA, where increases of domestic violence reporting has occurred because of COVID-19. I'm not saying COVID-19 is causing this upsurge, but it's giving abusive men another avenue with which to abuse, another strategy that they can use to abuse her.
Okay, and you mentioned before our podcast recording that there have been some new statistics released that show that domestic violence reporting has actually decreased. Now, to somebody who is not familiar with the space, and you see that on a news report, you would think that would be great news. But there is an underlying issue to this, isn't there?
Well, there is, and I think in other states in Australia, they have seen an increase. I think the most recent Queensland statistics have shown a slight decrease of reporting of domestic violence incidents. But it's, as the police commissioner in Queensland has feared, her take on this is that it's because the perpetrator's in the home with the victim. Her avenue, her pathways to reporting the abuse have been blocked off. And we will see, I believe, an increase in those statistics in the days, the weeks, the months to come. And that's where the true reality of the extent of the abuse will appear.
Because in domestic violence situations, they would be looking to conduct confidential conversations with service providers, maybe outside of the home. So would the fact that they're now being encouraged to use, phones and video telecommunication tools be hindering their ability, victims' ability to report these situations?
I would think it makes the reporting of the abuse much more riskier for her, because she is very much under his surveillance, under his control, while they both share the same space in the house. And he's going to be watching her, I would think, like a hawk, and monitoring her use of phones, her use of computers, etc. We know of cases where women are saying they fear going out to emergency departments at hospitals, because if they have been injured by a DV assault, they're afraid of catching COVID-19 if they leave the house. So there's a whole lot of variables at play here that are being used by perpetrators to further their abuse and their violence against their intimate partners.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of unknowns and unanswered questions as we, face this difficult time. Now, this leads me to the topic of keeping abusers accountable during COVID-19. So you recently helped inform the Red Rose Foundation's Eyes On approach to help keep offenders accountable. Now, this approach is broken down into four main categories. So it's police, probation and parole, men's behavioural change programs, and courts. Now, in terms of what measures should or need to be taken by police, can you please share with us what those might be?
Well, these are only my opinion, of course, and what I'm seeing is that a lot of men's programs are now closing up shop. They're not meeting as groups as they previously were because of the COVID-19 risk and the social distancing. So a lot of men's domestic violence intervention programs where men have been sent there, many of them by courts, by domestic violence order conditions, etc., are not available now. So we find that in the sector, program staff are ringing men. They may be trialling online work with these men, and the research to support the safety of that is not really very positive, because if a man is on an online program and something escalates him or aggravates him by what the facilitators or other men say, and he's still living in the house with the partner, we've got no control over how he behaves towards her when that video link is closed. So what I would be saying is that firstly, we need to have, as we normally have in this space, an integrated service response. So that means the responsibility for dealing with these men is not solely on the men's intervention program. The focus should be on a whole of community response. So that includes courts, it includes police, it includes probation and parole, it includes child safety, it includes women's advocates who are part generally of men's programs in most places. So I would be saying, first and foremost, we should be having a non-violence accountability plan that is prepared and organised by this whole community meeting. So my point would be that police, courts, probation and parole, child safety, men's services who are operating the program, women's services need to sit down and develop a plan of operation. I think obviously everyone's trying to do their own bit, but it could become a risk of being very fragmented in its approach. The whole of community response should have eyes on these men. So I would think, if possible, police should be made known of who the men in the group are, even if they're not court ordered. Police should know who is who in that group. I also believe that these men should be asked to report to police during the interim of the COVID-19 lockdown. Obviously, when this can be done safely for all, and that anyone who has a breach of a domestic violence order should be reporting more often, maybe twice a week, so police can keep their eyes on these men and how they're progressing during this time. If men are already on probation and parole, I would hope that maybe probation and parole can step up here, and men could have an additional check-in weekly for monitoring from probation and parole. So my point here, and I'm not definite about how it should be done, but these are some ideas that it's not a time to back away from perpetrators and to keep them invisible. It's actually a time to do more, not less, in creative ways of monitoring and supervising men.
Okay, and is there a responsibility on, say, group facilitators of men's behavioural change programs to sort of step up to the plate as well, and provide some, feedback or ideas into that, whole of community approach?
Well, I think there's a responsibility on all of us in the community to make sure that we're keeping women and children safe during this time, and that we're keeping perpetrators accountable. From my position where I am, and I'm in contact with a number of men's programs, I know that they are working overtime. I know that facilitators are on the phone, they're on video links with many of these men, and really trying to connect and contain these men during this time, and are really working long hours on the phone, more than ever before, in looking at creative ways to work with these men during these difficult days.
Okay, well that's good to know that,
It is good to know.
Stepping up to the plate is already taking place.
And also, can I say women's services are doing similarly with their clients. And it's very, very important, I would think, during this time for women's advocates. We're safe to make contact with women who are victim survivors of domestic violence to ensure that those women don't feel cut off, don't feel even more isolated than they are. And it may give them an avenue to report ongoing abuse, so that victims advocates may be able to do something about that for them.
Sorry, do you think a victim's safety has been considered when high-risk offenders are released back into the community? So if they're not going to these behavioural programs that have that face-to-face interaction, and they are being released and they might not be attending their online sessions, do you believe, a victim's safety has come into account there?
Well, I'm sure it's been front and centre on most agendas that I'm aware of. I think what we need to do, though, in terms of our focus on the perpetrators, we need to be very clear about what his context is. So, and by that I mean, is he at home with her, or is he on his own now? Is he at home with children who are in the household also? Is he actually working? In some cases, men may be out of the house because they're working more because of COVID-19. And in other cases, they may have been let off work. They may be unemployed now and may be looking for government benefits. What are the state of poverty in that household in terms of food supplies, medical supplies, daily supplies that families need to operate? How difficult is it for him in that situation, and for her in that situation, to buy food and supplies? I think, as well as the context, we need to know for him and in his area of Queensland or Australia, what are the social responses like for him? Are police responding to calls? Are probation and parole available to him? Is child safety aware of any further or increased risks? Does she have access to women's services? Is the court in their area still functioning in any way, shape or form? And then, of course, I think we have to look at, obviously, his level of risk. And I know that's what facilitators are doing in many of the programs. They're checking on his level of risk, his level of dangerousness towards her. And in terms of what are the stresses in that household, what are the stresses that he's facing and she's facing in terms of the social isolation, in terms of fear of getting sick, in terms of if there was any mental health issues there, are they being aggravated and increased by COVID? What about any misinformation that might be in that household, like him telling her that he's COVID-19 positive when he's not? Like him giving her false information about what she can and can't do. What about the increased stresses and strains on families where a perpetrator is in the household? If there's a lot of children home from school now at this time, what are the stresses increasing around that? Are children's risk increasing at this time too? So, those areas, his level of risk, the context, the terms of what social support is available, and the increased stresses that he's facing and that she's facing during this time, all can be lead to a perfect storm if not managed well, if not managed safely.
Wow, it's definitely not an easy fix, is it? There's a lot of things to consider.
A lot of
And
layers and a lot of complications and a very large amount of complexity in how we respond as a community to these people. What we do know is that when there's any natural disasters,
Mhm.
cyclones, bushfires, hurricanes overseas, earthquakes, etc., there has been an evidence of a spike in domestic violence. So we know in times of social stress, these other issues can arise. So it shouldn't surprise us that it's going to rise at this time. But I think you're right. I don't think we've had a pre-planned crisis plan ready to go when these events occur. And if we had such, and this is why I think in the aftermath of COVID-19, we need to sit down as a state and as a country and look at the learnings and look at the failures and look at maybe what has worked and then make an ongoing available crisis plan that we can use as a community into the future.
Yeah, that's consistent across all states.
Exactly.
Okay, well, this, this pandemic that we're currently living through is not only influencing, I guess, future plans that we need to put in place for domestic violence situations, but is it also influencing what we teach now in terms of domestic violence? So, will these sort of responsive aspects be integrated into the learning and teaching? You said that no sort of research has taken place in this field. Does it have the ability to sort of change the research landscape as well?
I think it will have to. I think it will have to. And, some positive learnings may come out of this that is going to be useful for education of people who work in this area into the future. What COVID-19 has done is we were entering into a very important phase, I think, of a turning point in Queensland and Australia with the recent family annihilation that happened in Camp Hill in Brisbane with the incineration of Hannah Clark and her children. And COVID-19 took that horror story off our front pages in some ways, sadly. Obviously, COVID-19 is another huge issue that we have to deal with, and very, very urgently we need to do that. But I would hope that that turning point that we were coming to, I believe, in addressing domestic violence in Queensland and in Australia will be able to be restarted, and that turning point will continue to help change the responses, help change the ending for women and children into the future. And of course, help change men in Australia too, who are domestic violence abusers.
Yes, of course. And that's another aspect of the situation too. You've got the victim's safety in terms of situations like this, but you've also got, the behavior of men and sort of what goes into that too to get them back on track as well. Now,
Exactly.
just quickly too, we're finding, I guess, in terms of the education space, that moving to an online sort of transition where teaching happens on an online platform to work quite well. Technology, though, in the case of a domestic violence situation, is not sort of working well. It's not recommended. So, for example, you have service providers who usually conduct face-to-face interactions, and now you have a woman who's social distancing, she's isolated in her home, who may or may not be encouraged to sort of talk to their service provider online, as we are doing now, to use her mobile phone. And I guess that's just one stressor of the many that women are facing. But it's just interesting observation to know that technology can work so well in one area and not so well in others.
Exactly.
Let's hope, that things progress, and we see this as an opportunity to better our plans and our systems for the benefit of victims and children all around Australia and the world. All right.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Brian, for sharing with me today some really interesting insights. You know, talking to you today puts a different perspective on some news articles you read online, or even some reports we're seeing on TV, which is great. You know, this is the stuff that we need to be hearing. It might be tough to hear, but it's great to know that things are in place, and we're working to be better prepared down the track. And I'm sure our listeners appreciate what you've put forward today as well. So thank you very much.
And thanks for your insightful questions, Jess. Appreciate it.
No worries. And until next time, stay safe, and I'm sure I'll chat to you in the future.
Good on you. Thank you, Jess. Bye now.
See ya.